Well, guys, we've got a heavy hitter on today, someone who I've been looking forward to have on the podcast for quite some time. Duarte, how are you?
I'm fine. Thank you very much for inviting me here. It's a pleasure.
Well, it's a pleasure to have you on, and I know we're going to talk all about skill, but I wanted to start off with something completely different. So, you live in Lisbon.
Yes.
I was there last summer, and it was lovely. How bad did I mess up by not seeing Fado? I didn't see any Fado, and I've told a couple people. I just kind of ran out of time. Did I miss the Portuguese experience by not seeing any live Fado?
It's something that you should not miss next time because it's a unique experience. You know, in Fado, you really have to live that moment. It's very embedded, you know. The performers sing in the way that they also feel the audience. So it's in every show is different. So it's a bit sad. It's a kind of blues, you know,
Mm-hmm.
but the experience is quite unique, and I strongly recommend.
Next time I will. I was in Porto as well, and that
Mm.
I just there's so many things to do, so many places to eat. I just kind of ran out of time, so it's one of my regrets. So I'll have to come back and
Sure,
check it
you're
out.
very welcome. Next time, just call me, and I will be pleased to show you some places.
I really appreciate that, and of course, you started to tie it in there with the conversation that we're gonna have about being embedded and experiencing Fado directly, right? And how
Mm.
that is really a unique experience. How does that tie into sports? How athletes are embedded within their environment? What's the connection between Fado and that environment and what athletes might experience?
Well, I think we humans are like that. The strange thing is that some scientific approaches decouple us from the environment, but that is the strange thing to notice. The interesting thing about sport, about Fado, about this experience is that we live them in a unique way. We the way we see a Fado concert is unique in the way we experience, and in sport it can go even further because we are participating, we are changing the interaction with the environment, we are using our entire body to influence the course of action. So that is quite unique and quite dependent on the circumstances. And this is really what ecology is about. It's how we are mutual with our environment. We could find the environment, and our action is what emerges from this system, this person environment system.
And you said this idea of mutuality, the
Yeah.
performer environment relationship, and how that's not necessarily what tradition has taught us to believe. Where is some of that old ways, this kind of maybe computation type of perspective? Where does that come from, and why has that been so pervasive in how we view just as an industry skill?
Yeah, it has a really really long tradition. You know, we can trace it back to Plato. You know, 2,000 years ago, and once he was brilliant, of course. Otherwise, we would not be talking about him 2,000 years later. So, but he conceived that there is an idealized world that we never could achieve, but that is the perfect world towards which we should work as humans. And this is a very intellectualized world where the body and our organic functions are quite surrogates, poor surrogates, because we never achieve to function in such an idealized way. So after Plato, well, the strong understanding and the ideas of Plato were very pervasive during more than 1,500 years until there was someone, another philosopher, a French one called René Descartes, who formalized this in the even more profound way. And it was in a time where science was also starting, like with Newton and just after Galileo. So it was very much the environment, the method theory that was needed to understand science as something that is detached from the human sense, the human body, the human functioning. And after Descartes, it became almost formalized in that way. And only recently, well, last century, in the 20th century, there was really some thought that was challenging this. And from my point of view, that comes from Martin Heidegger, a German philosopher. And he explained that for him, this was not the way of understanding what is to be, what is a human, but we should be understood according to our circumstances. So more than searching for what is being, we should understand what is becoming, which is always a dynamic process and related with our environment. There's not such thing as being as an isolated thing from the environment. So Heidegger really put this in a very interesting and very profound way. The problem was that he is very hard to read, not only in German, but even in translation. And after 2,000 years thinking in that way, it was not enough time that this understanding of the world mature enough for us to make it strong. I think a few people like James Gibson, really get that idea not directly from Heidegger, but more from another philosopher who continued it, called Merleau-Ponty. He got that idea and he made it a science, not simply a philosophy. And so it's quite recent. That's why we have all this pervasive understanding of the world as the idealization separated from the body and from our action. And this is a natural consequence is that to put that system of processing the world, of predicting the world somewhere, and that somewhere is in an organ that we don't know very well how it works, called the brain. So, but this is clearly a continuation of this Platonic way of thinking.
Well, you said something that I had to write down. I want to make sure I got it right. Is becoming versus being. Right? Is that what it was, or was being versus becoming?
Being versus becoming. So being is like search for the essence of people, like we could find our genesis, our essence inside of the skin. And the Heidegger challenged that, saying that we are much more in relation with the environment. So it's instead of just focusing on being, we should focus on becoming.
I like that a lot. I definitely will have to borrow that. I'm curious. So this perspective, right? Your view of skill and just how you view human movement in general. Did you always think like that, or did you come from more of a traditional background, and then it emerged through your studies?
Well, very interesting to think about that. Well, I was lucky enough to start studying in sports sciences, and sports sciences are related with sports, and it's quite interdisciplinary. So I didn't came from a psychology course or a philosophy course, so I didn't have that disciplinary view. But of course, in sports sciences, as you know, it's very disciplinary teaching. So physiology is one thing, biomechanics is another thing, psychology is another thing. But I had very good professors at the time that were very much in touch with reality. They were coaches, and they always bring that to their teaching. So they, like, for example, I had the chance to be taught by people like Carlos Queiroz, the Portuguese soccer coach, and other coaches, other professors that drives this idea that the way we have to deal with the athletes is based on the persons that they are, not on the pieces that we want to manage somehow. This was one thing, to see the person and not simply the athlete or the physical abilities of the athlete. And another thing was that, in this aspect, Queiroz was quite pioneer. He was always saying that we should learn football in the pitch. Football is the place to learn. The pitch is the place to learn football. In this sense, he was saying that if you want to train people, we should be in the pitch. We should know how to make the things that they need to improve in based on the pitch. And so that is quite ecological thinking. And it was a good luck that I also had a professor from psychology who also was a former coach and former athlete, who was in touch with ecological psychology, not from Gibson, but from Barker. But that was very interesting because Barker is also a very, very interesting guy who defined this concept of behavior setting. And behavior settings are settings that are not defined by the geography, but what the people do in a certain locale, in a certain place. And and those ideas were quite rich, and I didn't see how they match in the traditional theory and methodology of training books. So that was the challenge that I felt. Of course, I followed the traditional path as a student, but as soon as I could start to do my own research, I tried to mix and challenge these very separated links that different science use in sports sciences.
Cool. So it was a non-linear journey, it sounds
Yes,
like, but
exactly.
it makes sense you having that background, because I think what makes your work so appealing to so many people is that it does kind of cross a lot of populations, whether you're an academic reading it or you're a coach. I think you explain these things in a very relatable way, which is hard to do, I think, for academics, because the terminology and the jargon. So that's really cool to hear that background. Did you play soccer or football growing up?
Well, in Portugal, football is the sport that everybody plays. So of course I play like the other kids, but I was more related with different sports. I was very much into track and field and with climbing, So those were and also judo. So there was sometimes the three sports that I practiced more seriously was judo, track and field, and climbing.
What's cool about climbing, at least in the States, because I go to a bouldering gym, I don't do the top rope, but they call them problems. Like sometimes they'll refer to the routes as problems, and it's really interesting because that inherently implies there's some uniqueness to the specific situation. You're going to solve it rather than, I mean, I'm sure there is some people that memorize routes, right? But it's I'm going to solve it different than you. So that's what's cool. I always kind of think about climbing in that way.
It's completely like that, and even more in nature. When you are in nature, there's no grips for you to grasp. You have to find them. And sometimes you find them according to your own body movements, not because they are there for you to grasp. You have to find them in yourself. So it's a kind of relationship that you establish with the boulder and with the mountain. It's quite unique. And even though that people can memorize the routes, the way they can do it depends a lot on how they are. If they are very tired, they will do it differently. If they are very energetic, they can challenge themselves to do it differently. And that is also interesting. So it's not simply memorizing. Even if you do that, there's slight changes that always happen when you make those paths.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And it's, I can imagine the weather and all that stuff that, is not a factor in the indoor climbing, but, we're kind of dancing around the topic but skill is something that when I think of your work that really comes to mind, specifically that paper, what exactly is acquired during skill acquisition. And I would just love to maybe hear your thoughts on what is skill. I know it's a very broad question and we can kind of narrow it down, but what is skill to you?
Yeah. Yes, I will answer you directly without looking for the formal definition, which is the best way of doing this, and I can clarify a little bit more. But I see skill as a potential to perform some particular types of actions. So potential is very much related with skill. And for me, this is important to consider it as potential and not as action itself, or mistaking skill with the task, because the task is something that is in the environment, not really in you. So when someone is asked to perform a skill, they are being asked to perform a task, and their skill on that task is what I would call skill. So not the task itself. So it's this idea of potential, and I like to tell that it's a potential because it's not something that you bring with you. It is manifested in the circumstances where you are. So imagine you can walk very well, but if you are on the moon, you will walk very differently. And there is this famous change of gait that Neil Armstrong did when he walked in the moon. Instead of walking as we do on Earth, he started to jump from one foot to the other. So it means that he invented a new way of walking in the moon because of the circumstances. So that's why I think we can understand skills as a potential to perform a certain task. And if you don't mind, I can go a little bit deeper into this.
Absolutely, yeah.
And of course, we all as humans, we spend our life developing skills. And there was some researchers from sociology, I can share that paper with you, that call these normal skills that we have in our life ubiquitous skills, skills that are everywhere. So all of us can walk, can talk, or with all the variations that humans have, but we have that potential to talk, to communicate, to walk, to run, to crawl, to all those things. And those are ubiquitous skills because they are not being socialized in any particular type. So, well, there are some social and cultural influences, of course, but once we start to practice music or practice sports, we begin to socialize skills in particular ways that are really for that purpose of playing music or playing sports. So, and I think the interesting thing is that these ubiquitous skills, these skills that are related with human potential to interact with the world, then became more specialized to several degrees. So we can be a beginner in the sport, but we are already being specialized in running in the way that we do in sports. And I think this distinction is very important because it means that it needs these circumstances, these social environments to develop skills, to develop sportive skills. Of course, we may be fast runners when we were in school with the other kids and all that, but for them to become known as running skills, they should be socialized in the way that runners in track and field athletes, for example, start to work into them. So skill is this potential to perform actions that has different layers of specialization. And once you are being recognized in the group of people as practicing those sports, those skills become specialized in that domain.
So it starts with more potential and then becomes specialized given the context and the environment that that you perform the skill in.
And even in those circumstances, even when you are specializing that, and specializing means that you are trying to act in the ways that social group defines it, so that sport coaches define it, they are not a guarantee, even when you are specialized, that you will perform in that way. So even when you are being adjusted or specialized in a certain domain, the skills are still potential because, for example, the way you may run today is different from the way you will run tomorrow. So this means that potentiality is always present. So that's why I define skill as potentiality, but I also distinguish ubiquitous skills from specialized skills.
Right, and that's a great point to think about it, not just in the context, but the specific time.
Yes.
Right, the time that you're performing that could be completely different. That's a really good add there. So when we're thinking about developing skill, or what are some of the factors that potentiate skill, that make someone skillful? I believe in one of the presentations you did for us, it was me. I think there was a slide. It was nature, nurture. So what are some of the factors that contribute to someone developing skill?
Yeah. So since we are born, we are having experiences. Well, even before we are born, we are having experiences during the gestation time. So the nature is always concomitant. It's always happened at the same time as we are having influences from the environment since conception, if you like. So this is why this distinction between nature and nurture is an academic problem, not a real problem. They cannot be distinguished. So this means that we are always having these influences according to our circumstances, which can be related with experiences or can be related also with how genetics manifests itself in what we call epigenetics. So there's even the DNA does not guarantee that something will happen. It depends of what makes those genes expressed, and that is not what genetics is about. That is what epigenetics is about. So we have genetics, epigenetics, and then experiences. So there's lots of influences in how we can manifest ourselves in the world. So this means that when I discuss that idea of nature and nurture, it's because traditionally skill is addressed in that way. It's something that we are born or something that we practice. So my answer is that it's the two always. And the more we search for one side, we are missing the majority of the problem. If we just focus on genetics, we miss the majority of the phenomenon. If you just focus on training, we are missing a lot of things beyond training.
So they're intertwined.
They intertwine completely. Okay. Completely. So it means that for us, how can we develop skills? So if we are always having experiences, it means that for us to develop skills in a particular sport, the first condition is this process of socialization. This is very important. It's not something that comes out of the blue. So to play football, to play soccer, to play to be a wrestler, it demands some specific socialization for you to perform that sport in that particular way. So socialization, I think, is an important point. That's why I distinguish it from the things we can do without being in the social environment that clearly developed that specialization. And once we are in that specialization, is what we care. When we are in sports, we are already defined in that specialization, whatever the sport. I think there are three aspects that could develop this intertwined relationship between nature and nurture. So they developed at the same time. And I think this has to do with intentionality, how the things how in your experiences, you are acting in such a way that you converge your intentions with the task goal, with the tasks that's being presented to you. This is the first point. The second one is that the way you learn, how you learn to converge your intentions towards the task goal, you should guide your action based on the information that is available. So this implies that you should learn how to attune your perception. So intentionality makes you point towards what is relevant for that task, the task goal, and then perceptual attunement, what is the information that allows you to achieve that goal, that it can guide your action. And third, how do you act on that action? How you calibrate your movement, which is always circumstantial, to act on that information to achieve that goal. So this idea of intentionality, perceptual attunement, and calibration, I think, are the process that evolve over time. And these three aspects are not simply from the individual or not simply from the task. They imply what you are doing in every moment. That's why calibration is always specific to the information you are using. And of course, if you can be very well attuned and calibrated to something that is irrelevant to the task, so you will not achieve the goal. So that's why intentionality, perception, attunement, and calibration are the processes that need to work together for you to develop sports skill.
So as a coach, when you're potentially guiding intentions or providing, where would providing meaning of information, where would that fit in? Would that fit into this intentionality aspect, the attunement aspect as a coach? If you're a judo coach and you're, trying to help an athlete attune to some specific information source, where does that fit in there?
Yeah. Well, my understanding of meaning and value is very different from the traditional one. I see value from the affordances, so the information that is presented. It means that you you value more to act on that affordance than in other affordances. That's why value came from the affordance. It's not simply a mental judgment that you do about things. It's how that opportunity allows you to achieve a certain goal. So that is value. And meaning has to do with information. How you use that affordance, how you act upon that affordance in a more detailed way, how you are using that information to regulate your action to achieve a goal. So for me, meaning is a very functional thing. It's, of course, you can go home and reflect about how fighting is important for your life, but that is not directly what impacts upon you achieving your goals in performance. So for you, the meaningful things for a performer to achieve a goal is to how the opportunities, how the landscape of affordances is presented based on the task that the coach designs, and then how you are using the information available to guide your action to achieve a goal. So for me, the conception, the design of the tasks is one of the most important things a coach can do. So it's not trivial at all, because it may imply the unique characteristics of the athletes that you have, and also it may change over time. Like the athlete is changing, is being challenged to act upon that task, the coach may also change it, shape it in a way or another to better improve some aspect of the athlete for him or her to achieve the goal. So I think coaches can really, and they are. I learn a lot from coaches. They are brilliant in the way they can conceive those tasks that pushes the players towards the players themselves finding their own solutions.
And you said something that I caught. You said about this changing over time. And does this speak to this idea of skill adaptation versus skill acquisition as something that's acquired and held in somewhere versus something that is evolving over time?
Yeah, well, I really think skill cannot be acquired. It's not something that you possess and bring home and then put in your fridge. This is not something that you do with skill, So I think it's well, we are limited by language. We are empowered and limited at the same time. So it means that this idea of acquiring skill is a way that like we acquire knowledge. It follows the same tradition that we acquire knowledge. All this way of teaching that we are trying to challenge, that comes from the Industrial Revolution, that we are seated acquiring knowledge, and then we go to the world and we express that knowledge, is quite idealistic. It's really platonic in the sense that we simply absorb and have the knowledge inside of us. So I think skill acquisition comes from that tradition of acquiring knowledge and then express it. And it doesn't, from my point of view, it doesn't really reflect what is going on with skill. That's why skill adaptation is much more in agreement with what skill is about.
Yes, and as anybody who's ever been injured before and returned to sport, that's where it's so obvious that you go from therapy and then to the field or the ring or whatever it is, and it's completely different. So I'd love that concept. Unfortunately, I think skill acquisition is the term that we're using. It is what it is at this point.
Honestly, I don't see a problem with that. As soon as we know what we mean by the concept, the label, we can challenge it later on. But as soon as the people understand what we are saying, that is what matters the most.
That's a great point. You said language it gives meaning. I think you said, limits, and it also
yes.
Yeah. So I mean, language is right. That how you view a word, right, completely different. So I think that's a great point. I'd love to talk about this idea of cognizant action in sports. I know that's something you're keen to talk about, and I'm keen to learn more about. So if you don't mind, feel free to take it anywhere you'd like. But this idea of cognizant action in sport, what does that mean?
Yeah, well, first I was very much challenged to discuss the idea of embodied cognition. And I think it's a good idea. It's embodied cognition, a little bit challenge this idea of cognition is something that is simply stored in the brain. So embodied cognition means that at least the body is implied. and I like that idea. But I think it's still an extension of the previous rationale. It's like, cognition is in the body, but somehow it touches in the cognition is in the mind, but somehow it can be related with the body. It can touches on the parts of the body. It's a kind of cognition is the essential, but we don't neglect completely the body. And I was in several debates, and I have a paper where I discussed this in depth with Marcus Raab, and we discussed this idea of embodied cognition from two very different perspectives. And what I see from when we were preparing that paper is that the majority of embodied cognition approaches assume that the body is there because it is represented in the brain. So it still persists this idea of the world and the body is in the brain, and the brain tells the body what to do. And so I wanted to challenge that with a concept that clearly clarifies that what we are talking about is beyond that. It's not extending. It's not the same as the discussions about embodied cognition. What we want to say is a different thing. We want to say that the body in action is in itself intelligent. Cognition is expressed with the entire body, not simply with the brain or with verbalization. The way an athlete solves a problem, being in soccer or in wrestling, it's an expression of intelligence. So we should understand that what these athletes do are really outstanding. There's a few humans that can perform in the way that they perform. Like we see that with mathematicians or with artists. So they are unique people doing several things, but because mathematicians or some artists are aligned with this intellectualized view, so they can be seen as genius. And for the athletes, they are typically dumb, but they perform very well. That is crazy. I cannot accept that. So that's why I wanted to put that the body in action is our main expression of intelligence as humans. Since always, we discover the world by crawling, by interacting with the world. When we don't understand the world during the first 2 years of life is when we learn more and when we change more how to have meaning of the world. Have meaning of the world means we know what to do with things. We learn how to act on things around us. So that means that the way how we express our intelligence is not based on one portion of anatomy telling the other portions of anatomy what to do. It's all our full body interaction with the world. So this our interaction with the world is an expression of intelligence. And so I think that cognizant action tries to capture this idea that our action it's always an expression of cognition. Our action is always intelligence. Our action always implies adjust, attune, adapt to the specificity of the circumstances of our own personal changes and on the environmental circumstances that we are living. And this is a high achievement. This is something that a programmed robot cannot do, because if the circumstances change, it will persist with the same action and it will not solve the simple problem posed by those circumstances.
Wow, so that's super interesting. I instantly think about, well, before we had a written language, we moved, we expressed ourselves through movement. Yes. So I haven't. You're right, because you always think about an athlete. This guy's just happens to be a great athlete, but he's not smart in the classroom, right? It's really interesting, and I think it opens up a different way of thinking about movement and what is actually intelligence.
Yes, exactly. And I think it places action as a central aspect of being human, not intellect, not things detached from the body, but the way you move and react is central to understanding humans. And well, now you touch a point that I like very much to talk. It goes much beyond that, If we really think that we want to understand human behavior, we should understand that the science behind human behavior, called psychology or psychology science, whatever you want to call it, should not apply simply to those who speak. It should apply to all humans, independently of how they speak, And also it can be applied to any living organism, like we do it with biology or with physics. So it would not be a very reduced science that just apply to humans who speak, but to entire living organisms. And I think that is much more robust than simply relying on language. Of course, language is useful. I'm not saying that it is not, but the way what sports show us is that language is a surrogate of what action is about. Sometimes it helps, but some other times it doesn't help at all. Sometimes the way we discuss ideas with the athlete has nothing to do with how we play in the pitch, and we are interested in how we play in the pitch, not how we debate cognizant action with us.
Do you think that this, like, maybe, I don't want to say maybe overemphasis on language, maybe that's not the best way to say it, but affects how people coach? You know, how coaches sometimes will, you've probably seen coaches that will talk and talk and talk and talk, but at some point the athlete has to experience that particular scenario, right? They have to experience it in order to express and to experience that problem. Do you feel like that leads to coaches maybe overemphasizing communication as part of their coaching abilities?
Well, I think we are taught to do like that. We learn in school that it's everything based on language. So we are evaluated based on language. So that is very pervasive. That language is the basis of things that we should acquire knowledge, as we discussed before. So, and I think coaches and all the education systems follow a little bit this idea that we should be educated. But I think that coaches and PE teachers and people who we deal with, with students and athletes moving, they tend to see, if they are open to that, the limitations of just relying on language, because the way we move is much more diverse and rich, and to some athletes and some players, language can help, but to some others that is really perturbing. And even other cases that they can explain you very well what you should do and what is ideal in that moment, but they never perform in that way. So you see that it's another skill to speak, to discuss, to have the capacity to verbalize about action is a skill that can be helpful, but is different from the skill of performing itself, of acting in the sport. So I think we should be based on that. I think coaches tend to also know that, but we are taught as in our coach education also to have this illusion of control, that we as coaches should control everything. This is a complete illusion, but we are taught like that we have to fulfill all these plans, all these checklists and all that. And if we do that, we know everything about what needs to be done. And when you are in the pitch, you see how limited it is. And sometimes this is distracting you from the main things, from what really is happening in reality, not what is happening in your preconceived plans.
Yes, I think anybody who's worked with athletes knows that a plan sometimes can be ripped apart, right? If it doesn't work, you have to be adaptable. Going back to your paper, are there any other takeaways or practical takeaways that you would like coaches to understand from this reframing? Because I think this is a very powerful reframe. What else can coaches get from this particular paper that you wrote?
Yeah, well, I think the main thing is that the more the athlete is encouraged, empowered to find his or her own solutions, the better. So this means that sometimes I ask coaches, how do you teach decision making? They all teach decision making, or they train decision making, and they say, well, I present, you can do this, that, or that, so it's just up to you to choose. But you have to choose this when this happened, that when that happened. So they are simply putting all the decision making in their own instructions. So the player is simply executing this sequence of movements that the coach already conceived for the player. Well, I think the athletes have the capacity to discover solutions for future problems, for problems that they didn't even face yet. But for doing that, we have to put players in circumstances that it's up to them to find the solutions. It's up to them to make the decisions. It's up to them to see under those particular circumstances of their own state and the context that they are facing, how they can overcome what is going on. If the coach is focused that since the beginning, since all ages, so it's not just for the high level, it's for everyone, you are always offering the player the capacity of solving any problem related with sport. Not simply that problem in particular, but any problem, because they know where to search, where to adjust, and where to perform when that is needed. So I strongly encourage to create tasks, to create a practice design that always demands intelligence from the players. Always demand, even if they are kids, but the kids are very intelligent. They do incredible things with their bodies in the interaction. So always don't put them as simply mechanically repeating what you want them to do. Put them in circumstances that they found the best way of achieving the goal of the task you present to them. So I think this would be the main message.
So, and you mentioned this that challenges their intelligence in a way. So that would require a coach designing a task that is an adequate level of difficulty, right? That requires that the athlete has to engage with, that maybe perturbs their solution space a little bit. Do I say that's accurate?
Completely in that sense. And also the way they instruct the player is much more related to what is the goal of the task than how can you achieve this goal. So this is up to the player to discover. And if it's very hard, the coach can adjust. If it's too easy, the coach can adjust.
Yes, I think that's what is the goal of the task rather than this is how you solve the task. Because then as a coach, you're implying your own bias. You're, giving them the recipe when the athlete could solve it in a completely new, you almost strip away that creativity from them.
Completely. That is the point. So you are just allowing them to follow one possible path for solving the problem, and not for them to, according to their own bodies and their own movement, finding their own solutions. And the majority of them are creative solutions, are unique solutions. So in this sense, creativity is always there in the training since the beginning. You never take creativity away and just put it when they are high-level players.
So I would love to know, you've accomplished so much up to this point, and obviously there's much yet to do, I'm sure, but is there anything, and maybe we just discussed it, is there anything that you're really curious about, that piques your interest, maybe an unanswerable question? Is there anything that's like that for you?
Yeah, well, lots of things. I think I know too little. The more I study this, the more I'm fascinated with how sport people solve and achieve what they do. So I think we know too little, and I think to be humble is very good, because you pay attention to reality. You don't impose your theories to reality and make the reality fit in your theories. You are open to it. But I'm very curious about to know more how non-obvious experiences impact on learning, and on the development of expertise. Let me give you an example. We know from research that, for example, playing in the streets in soccer, the kids playing with each other, the backyard playing, and sometimes not simply backyard, but organized games that the kids do with themselves, have a strong impact in how they can play later on. Some of these experiences can be traumatic for some kids, and for others, these are very important. And sometimes the issue is not simply how they learn that technique or that tactic. Is, for example, I learned from kids that what for them was important was when they were playing with very tall or stronger players when they were kids, it's how to don't let them approach, to keep such a distance that they could not use their strength to take the ball from the kids. So there are some non-obvious experiences which are not related directly with technique and with tactic or with strength, that have a huge impact on how we learn in the future. And I think we don't know much about this. I think we just know about the more direct causal experience that have impact in learning, but not this non-obvious and more distant experience that have that supports those more causal relationships that we know about. And I would like to know more about this network of experiences that make an athlete persist and maintain high level of expertise.
Do you think one of the challenges of that is just because it is kind of a confluence of many experiences, so it's maybe tough to study?
Completely, it's exactly that. It's to understand life itself, how many things you do. But I also know that some things are more relatable than the others. Well, let me clarify. I know that these these this street football that the kids play are more related with how they play, even if they change to basketball or whatever. This is more related than simply going to the beach. So they are, and I'd like to know how these non-obvious experience that have impact, but have some relation that we can also grasp it and try to study it a little bit more. Otherwise, and for me this is important because otherwise we would always be well inventing based on traditions and on beliefs. For example, some people say that when the moon is full you will play bad. So I think that those are not the type of experience that we can relate with playing. So, and we can distinguish those more belief based assumptions from those that can be relatable somehow, and we show how they support other layers of learning later on. So that's why I think it's important. It's not they maybe they make the ground for the other more technical and tactical experiences to stay and not simply to fade out as it happens with some kids and not with the others. So we know little about this network of experiences that that support that more specialized learning.
Well, it sounds like you have some thinking to do, and you'll never run out of projects, which is exciting. I think we're all excited about that. As we start to wrap up, Duarte, I'm just curious if you have any message to coaches who are, I think what's really cool about what's going on right now is people are taking, the work that you've done and Keith Davids and many other people who are doing great work, and they're applying it. Do you have any thoughts for coaches that are trying to apply some of these ideas? Any closing thoughts for the audience?
Yeah, well, I'm very pleased if they try to do it. The idea is that if we pay attention to reality teaches a lot more than simply imposing our ideas and our beliefs. Pay attention to reality. Pay attention to what the players do and say and how they can help you in your own design, how you can share more with them in this co-design process. And I think if we put more, I will say it in this way, more psychology in the practice design, that is important, because by putting psychology means that you are making the person feel, live, and intend in the task that you are presenting them, and not simply executing mechanically what you are telling them. So if you put the people empowered with the courage enough to make those tasks, you are contributing a lot for this autonomy and creativity that all humans have.
I love that. I think that's great advice, and a fantastic way to close this out. Duarte, I really enjoyed this conversation. I normally don't write as many things down when I'm going through these conversations, but there were so many nuggets, so many just things that got me thinking, and I know our audience will benefit this. So thank you so much for coming on. We really appreciate the contributions that you've made to the field and what you will continue to do in the future. So thank you.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure, and I'm always happy to discuss these ideas with you.